The waiter humiliated her, not realizing that this black woman was the new owner of the restaurant. She returned not as a customer, but as a woman ready to dismantle the system of bias. What she did next will shock even the most seasoned. But let's start from the very beginning. The Manhattan sun reflected off the windows of luxury boutiques, creating an illusion of warmth and comfort. But behind this glossy facade lay another reality. A world where prejudice thrived in the most ordinary places, hidden behind polite smiles of waiters, masking indifference and contempt. Naomi Carter walked down the street with a light yet confident stride. Her black, glossy hair was neatly tied into a low bun, highlighting her sharp facial features. She wore an elegant white blouse, perfectly pressed dark navy trousers, and black loafers. Her gaze exuded strength and dignity, but beneath that confidence was someone who knew all too well what it felt like to be invisible to those who considered themselves superior. Today, Naomi decided to visit White Leaf, her newly acquired restaurant. She had purchased it just a week ago, but chose not to announce her ownership to the staff. She wanted to see how things truly operated, without forced smiles and artificial hospitality. As she entered, the light aroma of fresh bread and expensive coffee filled her lungs. The restaurant's interior embraced minimalist elegance. Pristine white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and the soft glow of lamps created an atmosphere of refined luxury. Attention to detail seemed paramount here. Naomi picked a table by the window to enjoy the city view and sat down, crossing her legs. Minutes passed. No one approached her. She watched as the waiters, all impeccably dressed in black and white uniforms, attentively served white customers who arrived after her. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. With every passing second, the silence at her table grew louder. People came and went, yet she remained seated, as if invisible. Clenching her jaw, Naomi raised her hand to catch the attention of one of the waiters. He noticed her gesture, but, pretending to be urgently needed elsewhere, quickly turned away. A familiar feeling ignited in her chest, a blend of humiliation and anger, well known to many who have faced the invisible yet palpable wall of bias. Finally, a waiter reluctantly approached her table. Kevin, a tall, lean white man in his mid-30s with a pale face and an expression full of arrogance. He stood with his arms crossed, as if evaluating Naomi. "Did you need something?" His voice was dry and cold, devoid of the polite warmth he had just shown to a white couple at the next table. Maintaining her composure, Naomi replied, "Yes, I'd like to see the menu." Kevin looked her over, his gaze lingering on her attire as if searching for something to confirm his prejudices. His lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "Are you sure this is the right place for you? We don't serve cheap fast food here." His words cut like a knife into her pride. Naomi felt her heart race. The air seemed thicker. A few patrons glanced over, curious but silent. She took a deep breath, suppressing the storm of emotions inside. "I just want to see the menu. Is that a problem?" Her voice was even, but a spark of defiance burned in her eyes. Kevin chuckled, shaking his head slightly with mockery. "Listen, lady, this isn't some diner. We serve a certain clientele here. Maybe you should find somewhere simpler where you'd feel more comfortable." These weren't just rude remarks. They were a clear message. You don't belong here. You're not wanted. Naomi felt a lump in her throat, but instead of lashing out in anger, she chose a different path. She slowly stood up, adjusted her blouse, and looked Kevin straight in the eyes. Her voice was quiet, but carried a steely firmness that made the restaurant fall into near silence. "Thank you for your hospitality. I'll be back tomorrow." She turned and walked away, leaving Kevin standing there with a smug grin, confident in his victory. But he didn't know that this invisible guest would return, not as a customer, but as the person who owned the entire restaurant, and then his indifference would turn into a harsh lesson. The next morning, the city buzzed with its usual hustle. Manhattan breathed with the rhythm of a metropolis, blaring car horns, the hum of voices, and an endless flow of people. But for Naomi Carter, this day was different. This was no longer just an inspection. Now it was personal. She stood in front of Whiteleaf, but this time everything had changed. Her white blouse was replaced by a sharp black business suit, its perfectly tailored lines accentuating her commanding presence. Naomi wore her favorite gold earrings, the ones she always chose for important meetings. They reminded her of her mother's words. Dignity isn't something given to you, it's something you carry within. Standing beside her was James Roberts, her personal attorney, a tall black man with a piercing gaze and a composed seriousness. His solid build and quiet determination added weight to every step they took together. "Ready?" he asked softly, looking at her. Naomi nodded, clutching a leather folder with the restaurant's ownership documents. Her heartbeat was steady, but a fire burned in her chest. They walked into the restaurant. Inside, everything looked the same as the day before. Neat tables, soft lighting, a carefully curated interior designed to mask the rot beneath. The waitstaff bustled, preparing for the morning rush. Behind the counter, as usual, stood Kevin, perfectly dressed, confident in his self-importance. When he saw Naomi, his face briefly twisted with surprise before he quickly regained his arrogant expression. He approached as if she were still the same unfit customer from yesterday. "You again? Couldn't find somewhere more your style?" His voice carried the same mockery, but now with a hint of irritation. Naomi met his gaze with a cold calmness that burned hotter than any words. "Please call the manager. I have important business with her." Kevin rolled his eyes, but reluctantly turned to fetch Maria Bennett, the restaurant manager, a woman in her 40s with a sharp face and perpetually furrowed brows. Maria approached them with a polite smile, mechanical and rehearsed. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Her voice was courteous but tinged with the fatigue of routine. Naomi stepped forward, her voice crisp, laced with a tone that demanded attention, even from those unwilling to give it. "Good morning, Maria. My name is Naomi Carter. I am the new owner of this restaurant." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Naomi's words echoed through the room like thunder on a clear day. Maria froze, her professional mask cracking for a split second. She tried to force a smile, but it was taut, like a string on the verge of snapping. "I'm sorry. You're who?" she stammered, as if unable to believe her ears. Naomi opened the leather folder and presented the ownership documents. James stood silently beside her, his gaze heavy and piercing. "I purchased Whiteleaf a week ago. Yesterday I visited incognito to see how things operate without the facade of forced hospitality. Well, now I know everything I needed to." Kevin turned pale. His smug grin vanished, replaced by creeping panic. He stumbled back slightly, as if hoping to disappear. "Whoa. Wait. I didn't know." His voice trembled, each word weaker than the last. Naomi slowly turned to face him, her eyes sharp as blades. "You didn't know? So if I weren't the owner, it would have been fine? You'd still judge people by the color of their skin?" The staff and customers who had been quietly observing were now fully engaged, some discreetly recording on their phones. Maria nervously adjusted her collar, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control. Kevin opened his mouth but couldn't form words. His face flushed, not from shame, but from fear. For the first time he realized his so-called power was nothing more than an illusion, one that shattered in an instant. Naomi took a step closer. Her voice was soft, yet in the thick silence, it roared louder than a shout. "You thought I was just another guest. You were wrong. I'm not just a guest. I own this place. And today, you're going to learn what it means to be held accountable for your actions." Kevin stood frozen, paralyzed by the collapse of the comfortable world he'd built around his biases. All that remained was the raw, undeniable truth, a mirror reflecting the man he truly was. A heavy silence filled White Leaf, so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. Every eye was fixed on Naomi, standing in the center of the room with ownership documents in hand and a cold, unwavering confidence on her face. She didn't raise her voice or make dramatic gestures. Her dignity spoke louder than any shout. Kevin stood there, pale, his lips trembling as he struggled to find words that might pull him from the abyss he'd created. But every careless word only tightened the noose around him. "Listen, Miss Carter. I didn't mean... It was a misunderstanding," he stammered, nervously swallowing, his voice as fragile as a flickering flame about to die out. Naomi stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. In her eyes burned all the anger and pain she had carried from encounters with people like Kevin throughout her life. "A misunderstanding? You're looking me in the eyes and calling this a misunderstanding?" Her voice was colder than a winter wind. "You didn't know who I was. That's the only reason you thought you could belittle me. But this isn't about me. It's about how you treat anyone who doesn't fit into the picture you've painted in your mind." The other servers stood frozen, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and growing shame. Maria, the manager, tried to step in. "Miss Carter, please, maybe we can discuss this in private." Naomi turned to her, her gaze sharp as an icy blade. "No, we'll discuss it here, in front of everyone, because this is what accountability looks like." She swept her eyes across the room. Some patrons were filming with their phones, others whispering, but no one could look away. "This restaurant is mine now, and I'll be setting new rules here. No racism, no discrimination, no hypocrisy hiding behind fake smiles." Then she slowly turned back to Kevin. "And you're fired. Effective immediately." Her words hit like a gunshot, clear, final, leaving no room for mercy. Kevin stepped forward, his face flushed with red, his voice rising in desperation. "You can't just fire me like that. I've worked here for 3 years. I have rights." Naomi looked at him with cold irony. "Were you thinking about my rights when you humiliated me yesterday? Or when you refused to serve me because of the color of my skin? Now you remember fairness? You can talk all you want about your rights, but I own this restaurant, and I won't tolerate people like you here." Kevin realized he had no more arguments. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dulled. He glanced around, hoping for support from his colleagues, but no one spoke. The other waitstaff avoided his gaze, ashamed not just for him, but for themselves. James, Naomi's attorney, silently observed, occasionally jotting notes in his notebook. He didn't intervene. Naomi had it handled, and she handled it brilliantly. Unable to bear the weight of his humiliation any longer, Kevin grabbed his belongings and quickly left, leaving behind nothing but an emptiness and a sense of defeat. His departure stirred no sympathy, no regret, only relief. When the door closed behind him, Naomi turned to the remaining staff. "Consider this a warning to all of you. I'm not asking for the impossible. I'm asking for respect, for everyone who walks through these doors. And if anyone isn't ready for that, the exit is right where Kevin left." Silence fell again, but it was different now, a silence of realization. People knew they had witnessed something far greater than just a firing. They had witnessed justice being restored. Naomi picked up a menu and slowly opened it, as if placing the final period in this conversation. "Now I'd like to order what I came for yesterday." Several weeks had passed since the day Naomi Carter forever changed the atmosphere of White Leaf. The restaurant, once hiding indifference and prejudice behind its luxurious facade, had now become a symbol of transformation. But for Naomi, This wasn't just a professional victory. It was personal proof that dignity and justice could resonate louder than discrimination. Shortly after the incident, a video recorded by one of the patrons went viral, amassing millions of views across social media. Headlines blared: "Black woman exposes racism in her own restaurant. Owner fires racist waiter in front of customers. A new standard, how one woman changed service culture." Public opinion rallied around her. People from across the city and beyond sent messages of support, sharing their own stories of discrimination and injustice. The restaurant became a place not just for food, but for inspiration. Naomi didn't stop with Kevin's firing. She implemented a mandatory training program for the entire staff. Sessions focused on racial equity, service ethics, and inclusivity. These weren't just lectures. They included practical workshops discussing real-life scenarios. The atmosphere shifted. There was no longer room for apathy or prejudice. One warm morning, Naomi walked into the restaurant again. She wore simple yet elegant attire, a light gray pantsuit and a white t-shirt. Her face carried no sternness, just a gentle smile. She felt proud. Not just for standing up for herself, but for creating a space where everyone could feel respected. The restaurant was bustling. People laughed, chatted, and the servers moved gracefully, their attentiveness genuine. The warmth and friendliness in the air felt tangible. Naomi made her way to the same table by the window, her favorite spot, where she had once sat feeling invisible and humiliated. Today, that table was a symbol of her victory. She sat down, placed her bag on the chair beside her, and looked around. A young waitress named Lily approached, an African-American woman with a friendly smile and confident eyes. In her gaze, Naomi saw respect and admiration. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter. What can I get for you today?" Lily's voice was warm and sincere. Naomi smiled back. "Thank you, Lily. You know, today I'd just like a cup of coffee and a bit of quiet. I'm here to enjoy what we've created." Lily nodded and walked away, leaving Naomi with her thoughts. She gazed out the window, watching the city's life unfold, feeling a quiet warmth bloom inside her. This was more than just coffee. It was proof that change was possible, that a voice raised against injustice could echo across an entire community. A few minutes later, Maria, the former manager, approached. After the incident, she had stayed on but completed the full training program. Her eyes no longer held the indifference Naomi had once seen. Instead, they reflected someone who had learned, grown, and embraced important lessons. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to thank you. Not just for pointing out our mistakes, but for giving us the chance to change." Naomi nodded. "Change is always a choice, and you made it." They exchanged a brief, warm smile. Naomi picked up her coffee, took a sip, and felt the slight bitterness of the brew blend with the indescribable taste of triumph. This wasn't just a victory over one waiter. It was a victory over a system, over silence, over fear. Sometimes, to change the world, you simply have to refuse to look away.